Good morning, and welcome to the session on the danger of illegally imported boats. I'm Jeff Ludwig, Chief of the Coast Guard's Recreational Boating Product Assurance Branch. Our branch is responsible for ensuring that recreational boats sold in the United States are compliant with all applicable safety requirements. That is why we have an interest in illegally imported boats, because they often don't comply with U.S. safety requirements. We have a great lineup of speakers that will highlight what boat importers are supposed to do to legally import and sell boats in the United States, and then, unfortunately, what is often happening in place of those legal requirements. They'll talk about how boats are supposed to be built and imported, the problems we are seeing with the importation process, the challenges illegally imported boats cause for states and the numbering process, and a case study on the real-world implications of illegally imported boats. The requirement to verify hull identification numbers has helped to raise awareness of this issue as the states are seeing customers attempt to number recreational boats that do not have valid HINs, and anecdotally, the Coast Guard is hearing more concerns about illegally imported boats as well. Our first speaker is Mr. Tim Rafter, and he will speak about what recreational boat importers need to do to legally import boats into the United States.
As Jeff mentioned, I retired from active duty Coast Guard just over a year ago after 25 years of service. My last active duty assignment was here at Coast Guard headquarters in the Office of Auxiliary and Boating Safety as the Safety Compliance Officer for the Product Assurance Branch. After my retirement, I was fortunate to be hired by the same office in the same branch, but in a civilian capacity as a recreational boating safety specialist and program analyst. Let's talk about the Coast Guard's vital role in ensuring the safety of recreational boats on our waters and the significant challenges we face with illegally imported boats. The bedrock of boating safety is the Federal Boating Safety Act. The Coast Guard is entrusted with enforcing the Federal Boating Safety Act, a landmark piece of legislation that since 1971 has mandated strict safety and construction standards for all recreational boats sold in the United States. This act is the foundation of boating safety, covering everything from life-saving equipment and fire safety to the structural integrity of the vessels themselves. The success of this act is clear. Since its passage, boat-related fatalities have dramatically decreased, even as the number of boats on our waterways has more than doubled. A cornerstone of the Federal Boating Safety Act is the Manufacturer Identification Code, also referred to as a MIC. Every person or company that builds or imports a recreational boat for sale in the United States must have a MIC issued to them by my office. This simple 3-character code that is the first part of a hull identification number, or HIN, is critical for a few reasons. One reason is education for the manufacturer. The process of obtaining a MIC includes an educational component, ensuring that builders are aware of and have the tools to meet the federal regulations. This includes taking a course on our Safe Afloat website and having knowledge of our toolkit on that website that contains a boat builder's handbook, links to regulations, a list of current Coast Guard policies, and many other useful items. Traceability. If a safety defect is discovered, the MIC allows us to quickly identify the manufacturer and ensure they take corrective action, which often includes recalls if necessary. Inspections. The MIC is how we know who is building and importing boats into the United States, which is essential for our factory compliance inspection program. Our compliance inspectors visit manufacturers on a regular basis with the goal of working with the manufacturers to ensure they meet federal requirements. State titling and registration. The MIC allows the states to verify whether the manufacturer of a boat being titled or registered was issued a MIC by the U.S. Coast Guard. So let's talk about some of the new challenges and especially outdated regulations. Unfortunately, the very regulations that have been so successful are now struggling to keep pace. Enacted over 50 years ago, the rules governing MICs and HINs are somewhat obsolete. They simply did not envision the complexities of today's global marketplace. This has led to a number of concerning scenarios, one of them being deceptive online retailers. We are seeing a surge in online retailers selling boats directly to U.S. customers with marketing claims like meets U.S. standards or no HIN required, unsuspecting buyers purchase these vessels believing they are compliant, only to discover they cannot be legally registered. We have also seen these companies change their name frequently, so when customers do try to reach out to them for a refund, the seller is no longer available. In some cases, a person who sells recreational boats through these online retailers in an attempt to make a quick buck is not aware of federal laws and regulations that apply to the products they are selling. This creates a problem when they sell boats with no HIN or a foreign HIN. Lack of oversight by digital marketplaces. Currently, almost all digital marketplaces do not have built-in processes that prevent the sale of non-compliant recreational boats to customers in the U.S. However, there is one major online retailer that is working with our office to find a solution. Foreign manufacturers are actively seeking ways to bypass the requirements of a U.S. importer. A common tactic is to have the customer claim they self-imported the boat. However, a true self-import has strict requirements such as the buyer purchasing the boat from a foreign country and arranging for its transport themselves. The foreign manufacturer has to have no intention of selling their boats in the U.S. and does not ship the boat to the customer themselves. Cases involving claims of self-importation are rarely legitimate. So what are some of the consequences of illegal imports? These illegal import scenarios create a ripple effect of negative consequences. Public safety risk. The most significant concern is the safety of the public. Many buyers are unaware that their boat may not meet critical safety standards, putting themselves, their families, and other boaters at risk. Burden on the states. State titling and registration officers are on the front lines, tasked with the difficult job of identifying and dealing with these non-compliant vessels during the registration process. Many times they need to reach out to our office at Coast Guard headquarters for guidance, which, because of the volume of these cases coming into our office, can take several days to receive a response. Undermining compliant businesses. The flood of illegal boats undermines the vast majority of manufacturers and importers who invest the time and the resources to comply with federal regulations. Most of these companies go above and beyond the minimal federal regulations by ensuring their boats meet the industry standards developed by the American Boat and Yacht Council. Enforcement and a path forward. The Coast Guard is not passive in the face of these challenges. We work closely with Customs and Border Protection to inspect boats before they enter the marketplace. When we do encounter illegally imported boats, our first step is always to work with the foreign manufacturer or importer to achieve compliance. We have seen instances where the foreign manufacturer is not aware of the requirements to sell their products in the U.S. and end up going through the process to comply, including establishing the use of an importer located in the U.S. However, the sheer volume of boats entering the U.S. continues to be a major hurdle. Furthermore, our authority has not kept pace with the problem. The current regulations do not give Coast Guard the explicit authority to suspend or revoke a MIC of a non-compliant boat builder or importer. Nor can we issue a HIN when the original builder or importer is no longer in business. We can issue civil penalties, but this is often not a sufficient deterrent. Also, in regard to illegal imports, we do not have jurisdiction over foreign manufacturers, which is why having an importer located in the United States is required. Addressing these challenges requires a multifaceted approach. We must raise public awareness about the dangers of illegally imported boats. We need to explore ways to modernize our regulations to close these loopholes and provide the Coast Guard with clear authority needed to act decisively. By working together, regulators, industry, retailers, and the boating public, we can ensure that our waterways remain safe and enjoyable for everyone.
Our next speaker is Caroline Mantell from Boat History Report. She is going to talk about the impact of illegally imported boats on the boat resale market.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about such an important issue from a public safety standpoint. So, as you've heard, I've worked with multiple different organizations across the boating industry. And in those roles, my day-to-day work really sits at the intersection of data, fraud, real-world incidents. So today, I was hoping to use that experience to focus on illegally imported boats, but from a public safety standpoint. When we talk about illegally imported boats, it is very easy to think of it as just a compliance issue or a border issue or even a paperwork issue. But it's not. It's really a public safety issue that grows quietly. And then all of a sudden, it shows up and it's usually someone's very worst day. And I think, also really important is it's not just that first buyer problem. It's not that person that imported the boat that the problem stops with. It continues on to everyone that owns the vessel after that. So it's really this downstream problem that moves from one owner to the next, across state lines, across marketplaces, across years. And with each transfer, that connection back to how that boat entered the country in the first place and whether it was ever compliant becomes weaker and it becomes harder to trace. So I think you've likely heard your fair share of regulation. So I thought I would start with a couple of very real scenarios that I see reflected on a regular basis, both in the work that I do with Boat History Report, but then also with investigations and some of the other organizations that I work really closely with. So the first scenario that we're going to talk about the small craft, right? So a parent, I have a 3 and a 6-year-old. I have 2 young kids, and we're always looking at ways to get our kids out on the water and, make them really competent boaters and water safe advocates and especially down here in South Florida. So let's just say this parent buys an inflatable or a paddle board or a small paddle craft, and they buy it online. It's easy, right? It's affordable. It ships quickly. It feels really low risk. There's no dealer, there's no walkthrough, there's no registration requirements. You don't have to trailer it. You can throw it in your truck. It's easy, and the family uses it. The kids use it. The dog uses it, right? It works. Nothing ever goes wrong. And after a year, they decide, okay, we love this. We're using this all the time, but we need something that we can all use together. So they decide to upgrade. And that first boat either gets sold through some sort of online marketplace or it gets passed along to another family. And now the second owner has that boat. The second owner has no visibility into how that product entered the US, who the responsible party was, whether it was ever built to the standards that are meant to protect people on the water. And one day, something fails. It could be a seam, it could be a valve, a structural component, something as simple as the product not performing the way that it was represented, the way that they expected it to perform. But the problem is, when that failure happens on the water, it escalates the safety risk and very, very quickly. And in those cases, it's not just the incident itself that creates the issue, but it's everything that happens after. There's no clear manufacturer. There's no person to be held accountable. There's no recall pathway, no traceability. And the system that's designed to respond to those safety issues can't respond because we never really knew the boat to begin with. So now let's look at the second story, right? The second scenario. And this one matters because it reflects the majority of the market. I think you've probably heard the stat at some point that NMMA has shared, roughly 95% of boats in the US are 26 feet and under. So that means we're talking about these family boats. We're talking about the trailerable boats. We're talking about the boats you see every weekend. We're talking about our boat. We have a 16-foot boat. It fits in our garage. The truck can tow it. Both kids and the dog can fit on it. We're talking about the majority of boats that families and people use here in the US. So let's picture that same family from the first scenario. They're ready to upgrade. They had a great experience buying online last time, so they think, let's do it again. Let's find our perfect boat. They find a small fiberglass center console, fits in their garage, their vehicle can tow it. It's a lot cheaper than what they can find locally. It's priced just low enough to feel like a great deal. They import it, it clears entry, nothing flags it. They go to register it. Maybe at the registration office, the HIN looks right on the surface. Maybe there's a valid manufacturer identification code, a MIC, but that MIC was actually copied from a US manufacturer that the foreign builder used to kind of bypass any red flags, or maybe it's a foreign identifier and it just wasn't recognized as an issue at the registration office. Or maybe even it was recognized. Maybe somebody recognized that the manufacturer identification code in the HIN didn't match the manufacturer of the vessel. So that person just issued the family a state assigned HIN. They were trying to be helpful, trying to get the family out on the water. And from that family's perspective, everything's legitimate. They have the paperwork, they have the registration, they have every reason to believe that that boat is safe. And then they launch. And this is where that conversation again shifts from just a standard process to a much bigger problem. Because we know that the US has safety standards and we know why they exist, right? They exist because when things fail on the water, like we said before, they fail a little bit differently than they do on land. And this is where that public safety becomes real. Now, I can't obviously tell you the exact design decisions of this hypothetical manufacturer overseas, but here's a reasonable assumption I think that we can make in this low-cost direct ship model, right? When the shipping costs and the production speeds dominate, there can be strong incentives to reduce the weight, to simplify systems that speed up production, to bypass these expensive requirements for fuel, electrical, flotation, or ventilation. And where do these shortcuts or cost savings show up? It's not at the point of sale. It's not at the registration office. It shows up out on the water. And in that moment, that non-compliant is no longer just a regulatory term. Now, it's a swamping that shouldn't have happened. It's instability that catches the family off guard and somebody goes overboard. It's a fire risk that was entirely preventable. And again, the people that are experiencing this often aren't even the first owners. In this scenario, it's the person that imported the boat, but what about the next family that buys this boat or the next person that buys this boat and uses it? And again, receives all the documentation, receives all the information that they need to use the boat without any of the information that that boat was illegally imported to the US. So if we're only looking at this issue at the point of entry or at the point of registration, then we miss how it actually behaves in the real world because that risk moves. So it moves from the manufacturer, it moves to the importer, to the first buyer who might be the importer, to the second buyer, to the state, to the insurance company, to the lender, and eventually to the law enforcement or the investigator in worst case scenarios. And by the time it gets to that last group, it's no longer a question of compliance. It's a response to an incident. From an industry standpoint, we can see the full chain, right? We see the lenders holding the collateral that may not have the value or the safety profile they expected. We see the insurance carriers trying to work through claims where identity and compliance are unclear. We see investigators trying to reconstruct what happened without reliable information. And most importantly, we see the families who thought they were making a safe, informed purchase. And you've likely heard that there are very clear regulations for what qualifies as self-import and how to handle it properly. Following and enforcing these regulations matter because they prevent the misuse of this self-import concept as a repeatable business model. They also help reduce the exploitation by bad actors. But unfortunately, when a consumer buys that boat directly online, first off, they don't often understand that the transaction and the purchase may not comply with U.S. imported and safety compliance expectations. It's not their fault. As a consumer, I trust that there are measures in place to keep me safe. I'm not thinking about manufacturer standards every time I make a purchase. That's the point of the US safety and compliance framework. Their job is to prevent dangerous products from entering commerce without accountability. But as somebody who works in boating safety, it's why that exact regulation that distinguishes these legitimate one-off purchases from ongoing introductions of untraceable non-compliant products are so important, because the consumer isn't aware of it. So, one of the clearest indicators of pressure in the system, right, is the growth of state-assigned HINs. In the Boat History Report database, we now have over 1.8 million unique state-assigned HINs. When you think about it, that's an incredible amount, right? There's just under 1 million boats registered every year. Our historical database has over 1.8 million unique state-assigned HINs in it. But more important, in 2024, there were over 20,000 state-assigned HINs issued in that year alone. And of course, some of those, there are legitimate reasons for a state-assigned HIN to be issued. But the number of state-assigned HINs being issued is also why NASBLA's VERT committee has warned that the ability to assign what a state-assigned HIN is typically referred to as a Z number. So the ability to assign that Z number can actually create a loophole for foreign boat builders to circumvent federal requirements. It's why NASBLA's VERT committee warns that states should be issuing these Z numbers, these state-assigned HINs, carefully and in very limited circumstances, because it creates a loophole for foreign boat builders to circumvent federal requirements. When identity exceptions, such as a mismatched manufacturer identification code or a bad HIN format, become routine instead of something that triggers a closer look, we create space for those bigger problems. The acceptance and lack of scrutiny in these identity gaps make it easier to hide non-compliance and harder to protect the next owner. And this is happening in an environment where access has never been easier, right? E-commerce has fundamentally changed how boats and watercraft enter the market. And AI, I know it's a buzzword we're all trying to shy away from, but it truly makes the forging of documents exceptionally easier. Consumers can now purchase these boats directly from overseas sellers, often without ever realizing that what looks like a simple transaction doesn't actually meet the US safety expectations. And that's what makes this a public safety issue, not just an industry issue. I think of it as building a 4-check habit before a boat becomes someone else's problem. So the first step, the first check, is to validate the MIC. So the Coast Guard maintains a MIC search database for manufacturers, and it's exactly what states and industry should use when validating identity. You can validate whether the claimed manufacturer or importer is real, and if it matches the first 3 characters of the HIN. If that MIC doesn't match, don't treat it as clerical. Don't treat it as something you simply need to fix with a state-assigned HIN. Escalate the issue. Look into it. Look at it as a red flag. Check 2, validate the HIN format. Read it like a safety tool, not just a string of characters. Federal rules define a very specific 12-character HIN format. You shouldn't just be treating US-looking HINs as necessary, because that's not sufficient. You need to treat suspicious identity cases, again, as an escalation event, not a simple clerical exception. Check 3, cross-check your documentation and status. When possible, use the different Coast Guard tools that are out there. There's PISIX, there's Viz. You can use services like Boat History Report or other services to verify HIN formats and history and collect supporting documents that show that chain of sale, the import entry, and not just a screenshot of an online listing. And check 4, use an affidavit and a document packet for these self-import claims. So again, NASBLA's VERT committee has a recommended affidavit framework, and it includes a detailed list of data and supporting documents such as vessel type, hull material, port of entry documentation, shipping evidence, etc. All of that information ensures that these are consistently collected before issuing a state number and certificate of number. That affidavit can also assist law enforcement because it requires the applicant to provide a lawful statement of entry, which is very helpful. I mean, at the end of the day, if we can adopt these 4 checks consistently across everyone, across buyers, lenders, insurers, investigators, state offices, we're going to protect not only the first buyer, but we're going to protect the second buyer. We're going to reduce fraud. We're going to prevent public safety harm that should have never entered commerce in the first place. Because every time we miss that moment, that risk doesn't disappear. It just moves on to the next person. So it's not a small issue. It touches families, it touches first-time buyers, experienced voters, lenders, insurers, responders. The impact is often not visible until it's too late. But, there's so many things that we can do to help it and to prevent it from continuing to grow. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share this perspective.
Our next speaker is Scott Berry from the National Marine Manufacturers Association. He is going to talk about what manufacturers do to ensure that recreational boats are compliant with all U.S. Coast Guard safety requirements.
Good morning, and thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here representing the National Marine Manufacturers Association and the U.S. boat manufacturers to talk about something we all care deeply about, the safety of recreational boating. In the United States, manufacturers operate under some of the most rigorous safety expectations in the world. Responsible manufacturers don't treat safety as a checkbox. They build it into every step of the process, from the initial design all the way through production. So what does that look like in practice? First, it means designing and building vessels in accordance with standards set by the U.S. Coast Guard and the American Boat and Yacht Council. These standards cover critical areas like flotation, electrical systems, fuel systems, and ventilation, all essential systems that keep boaters safe on the water. It also means investing in ongoing employee training so that every team member understands and consistently applies the latest safety and manufacturing requirements. Manufacturers also implement strict quality control processes and use durable, fit-for-purpose materials to ensure long-term reliability, not just when the boat leaves the factory, but for years to come. Traceability is another key component. Proper hull identification numbers, or HINs, allow every vessel to be tracked and verified throughout its life cycle. In addition, many manufacturers participate in the National Marine Manufacturers Association certification program, which includes third-party inspections to verify compliance with rigorous industry standards. Together, these efforts ensure that boats entering the U.S. marketplace are safe and reliable. But there's a growing challenge that we need to address. The influx of illegally imported recreational boats threatens these standards. These vessels often bypass critical safety requirements and lack proper equipment, traceability, and compliance with established safety regulations. This not only puts consumers at a risk, but also undermines the integrity of the marketplace and the responsible manufacturers who are committed to doing things the right way. That's all I have. Thanks for having me, Jeff. I'll turn it back over to you.